Wildfires raging across the West leave a wake of destruction.
I have not personally seen a fire grow so fast in such a short amount of time.
And cause dangerous air pollution levels to spike nationwide. The Colorado River, a vital resource for millions of Americans, faces overuse and drought fueled by climate change.
We are using about 20% more water than the river is delivering on the average. The reservoirs are going dry.
And as the world's best athletes compete at the Olympics in Paris, a heat wave sparks concerns for athletes and spectators alike. We look at how climate change could affect the future of sports globally.
Children are not going to be able to play baseball outside. People are not going to be able to play tennis outside. Something's got to give.
Welcome to PBS News Weekly. I'm William Brangham. In this episode, we're turning our attention back to climate change and how it intensifies extreme weather, causing devastation across the planet. This week alone, landslides triggered by torrential rains in southern India have killed at least 150 people. Heavy rains in Vermont crushed vehicles, caved in roads, and swept away homes. And out west, wildfires are raging.
This is the view for firefighters on the front lines of California's Park Fire. The blaze, believed to be started by a local man's burning car, is now the 5th largest in state history.
I have not personally seen a fire grow so fast in such a short amount of time.
In just a week, nearly 400,000 acres burned across 4 counties, forcing thousands of evacuations and destroying hundreds of structures. In rural Cohasset, California, Dave Tejan and his son Jonathan are both members of the county fire department. While they battled to protect their town, their own homes were lost to the flames.
I feel luckier than some of the people here because we do have a few things, not very much, but a few things to hold in our hands that survived. The friends from that I've known for so many years have just stepped up and shown so much support. You know, I feel rich in that.
Christy and Michael Deneau also live in Cohasset. They lost their house to another fast-moving fire 6 years ago in Paradise, California. Now, this is all that remains of the home where they rebuilt their lives. They had no fire insurance.
The most important things I grabbed was me and my brother and sister have my mom's ashes along with my dad. And so I was able to grab a few little pictures and her ashes.
The Park Fire's explosive expansion is nearly unprecedented, says UCLA climate scientist Daniel Swain.
This is definitely a top-tier event in terms of how quickly it moved across the landscape in those initial days. Some of the fastest rates of spread over that initial 24 to 48-hour period that we've seen on a wildfire in this part of the world.
Nearly 100 fires are currently burning across the West, and 4.5 million acres have already burned this year, about 1 million above average. This week, multiple blazes broke out across Colorado's Front Range, killing at least one person and forcing residents to flee their homes near Denver. Governor Jared Polis has now activated the National Guard to assist with logistics. Meanwhile, in Oregon, crews are stretched thin, battling more than 30 separate fires.
I've lived here all my life and never seen it this way.
To make matters worse, another brutal heat wave is forecast to turn up the temperature this weekend, a dynamic that Swain says continues to drive the intensity of this year's fire season.
All of that extra heat, even following what was a relatively wet winter in some places, has really dried out the vegetation, in some cases to near record dry levels.
And that means there's plenty of fuel for the fires yet to burn. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Sy.
And as those fires burn across the West, they can impact the air that millions more people are breathing far beyond the burn zones. These fires also generate massive plumes of smoke, which carry tiny, dangerous particles. And that smoke spreads across a much larger region, covering huge swaths of North America all the way to the East Coast.
We think that living in a smaller city or living particularly in farm country where I grew up, that you're protected from the effects of high particle levels. But unfortunately, with the wildfires, everyone is affected, either large city or small city.
Lauren Wold runs a lab at The Ohio State University that studies how those tiny airborne particles, they're known as PM 2.5, when breathed in, can harm human health.
They can actually pass through the lining, get into your bloodstream, and then affect your heart, your lungs, your brain, any organ system. On days when PM levels are high, particularly during the wildfires, for example, that there is a significant increase in the amount of patients who are going to emergency rooms for things like sudden cardiac events.
Wold's research indicates that not only do these negative health impacts last long after the air is cleared, but in studies with pregnant mice exposed to contaminated air, their offspring were also seriously harmed by the smoky air. So mice that are in utero, that they themselves are not breathing contaminated air, their mothers are, that passes to them and then lasts for those baby mice for a good chunk of their own lifetime?
Yeah, correct. Once it's in the bloodstream, it can get into the maternal and fetal circulation and have effects on the offspring. And not only does it have cardiac effects, but it also has, we've shown that it predisposes animals to development of a neurocognitive phenotype similar to an Alzheimer's disease animal.
One recent study showed that exposure to smoke-filled air can also shorten a person's life. It estimated that between 2008 and 2018, wildfire smoke in California was responsible for over 50,000 premature deaths, equating to an economic impact of over $400 billion. Anthony Wexler directs the Air Quality Research Center at the University of California, Davis. He wasn't involved in this study, but says this is further evidence of how climate change is impacting human health.
Climate change is changing everything about the weather patterns that we're used to. Wildfire smoke emits a lot of PM 2.5. And so just extending those correlations, the higher the concentration, the more people will die from heart attack. And the wildfire smoke makes a lot of this PM 2.5, and so we're going to see excess deaths.
So how do you know if the air you're breathing today is risky? Researchers measure that using what's called the AQI, or Air Quality Index. The higher the number, the more dangerous the air.
50% or so of the U.S. is under unsafe levels. And the scary part is that those with sensitive conditions, as well as the elderly or the very young, the levels are actually different. So, 100 is not considered safe for those individuals.
That's a huge number of Americans today breathing this dangerous air.
It is. It's very scary.
Researchers say limiting the time spent outdoors, wearing a mask when you can't, and making sure air conditioning and heating systems have high-quality filters can all help. But until these massive fires are brought under control, the air that many Americans are currently breathing will continue to be a threat. And we shift now from fire to water. The Colorado River provides water for 40 million people, but that critical resource is in jeopardy because of overuse, waste, and a historic drought increasingly driven by climate change. PBS News science correspondent Miles O'Brien recently looked at the many challenges facing the Colorado River Basin. Miles talked with former Arizona Governor and Secretary of the Interior Bruce Babbitt. That was part of a PBS News special called Tipping Point, Colorado River Reckoning.
Who owns the Colorado River?
The United States of America owns the Colorado River. But the answer is not that simple. We are in a federal system in which the states take the position that they own the underlying rights and they are allocated out according to state law. And that all worked fine when there was enough water. The states are now at each other's throats saying, hey, we got to recarve this pie, but they can't agree on how to do it, and we've got the makings of a genuine water war.
A water war?
That phrase is tossed around a lot. But this one is real because the impasse is going to lead into a real dilemma where who's going to decide who gets how much water.
Is there any question that some entity or multiple entities are going to have to live with less water?
Well, of course, that's the underlying fact. We are using about 20% more water than the river is delivering on the average. The reservoirs are going dry. We've got to find a way to reduce water deliveries somewhere in the range of 10 to 20% on the best assumptions that the scientists can make. And the question is, whose ox is gored? Who is going to get cut? And in the absence of rules as they expire, you can see it's going to be Armageddon on the river.
It sounds like anarchy a little bit.
Yeah, anarchy is a better description because nobody wants to give up their water, and everybody is going to suffer to some degree. And we haven't been able to rise to the occasion because for 100 years we've been operating on false assumptions about how much water there is, and when there's a lot of water, it's easy to compromise disputes as they come up. That time is over.
Does a strict seniority system work in a world with diminishing water and increasing demand?
Well, more than half of the Colorado River water that belongs to Arizona is growing alfalfa down in the desert. Phoenix is way down the line because the population didn't start to really boom until the last 50 years. So Phoenix is looking at all of those vast fields of alfalfa saying, is this really a good way to allocate water? Farmers are saying, sorry, we were here first, tough luck.
There must be a way to cajole or convince farmers perhaps to plant less thirsty crops or come up with ways to compensate them for using less. Is that kind of a third rail issue in your part of the world?
Well, it's a third rail issue, but inevitably there's going to have to be some reallocation, readjustment. I mean, the idea of an equitable allocation of water can't be based on what happened 100 years ago. And 5 million voters in Phoenix are ultimately going to say, third rail or not, we determine how water is allocated in Arizona. It's been an untouchable subject so far, but that's going to change. There has to be a readjustment, a reallocation between agriculture and the growing urban areas.
Governor, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Amid this critical debate over how to fairly use and distribute water across the Southwest, Miles looked at how some cities are getting creative with their water conservation.
When many people think of wasted water in the West, they think of this. The famous fountains at Bellagio on the Strip in Las Vegas. But the fountains and the lake are fed by an aquifer, and it's all recycled, conserving the municipal supply, which is piped in from Lake Mead. And Las Vegas has placed some big bets on water conservation. The city reclaims almost all of its water used indoors. It is treated and then either returned to Lake Mead or used for industry or irrigation of golf courses and public parks. The Southern Nevada Water Authority runs a Cash for Grass program, paying property owners who replace their thirsty lawns with water-efficient landscaping. This program has saved billions of gallons of water by removing millions of square feet of grass. The city strictly enforces watering schedules, encourages drip irrigation systems, fines violators that waste water, and uses smart meters to provide real-time data on usage. Las Vegas is a poster child for thrifty use of municipal water. Many other big cities in the West take a similar approach. In Denver, they run an award-winning campaign to encourage residents to be mindful of water use. They offer rebates for water-efficient appliances, fixtures, and irrigation equipment. They promote smart irrigation controllers, and they have incentives for people to replace traditional lawns with drought-resistant landscaping. The city treats and repurposes wastewater for uses such as irrigation and industrial processes. And Denver Water is testing the waters on a controversial but likely inevitable idea: direct potable reuse, treating wastewaters to a level safe for drinking and then piping it right back into people's homes.
Combating climate change principally involves us putting less greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere, and carbon dioxide is the gas that gets the most attention. But methane is actually much more potent at warming. While it doesn't last as long as CO2, when it's up there, it can be 28 times more effective at trapping heat. PBS News Weekend correspondent Ali Rogan recently looked at how Denmark is working on a unique and controversial approach to cutting methane.
Landfills, oil, and natural gas all contribute methane, but according to the United Nations, 32% of human-caused methane emissions come from livestock. Denmark's coalition government announced that they would introduce a first-of-its-kind annual tax on livestock greenhouse gas emissions. It amounts to about $100 per cow in an effort to curb climate change. Ben Lilliston is the Director of Rural Strategies and Climate Change at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. Ben, thank you so much for being here. First of all, how big of a problem is methane, and does it get enough attention as it relates to the attention that seems to be put on carbon dioxide?
It's a huge problem. It's a huge challenge. It's also an opportunity to help us have a bigger impact on climate change faster. So methane is only in the atmosphere for around 12 years. And it is about 80 times the potency of carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. So as a result, if you reduce methane, you can get more near-term results and allow us to have a little longer of a window to reduce carbon dioxide emission.
And why do cows and other livestock produce so much methane?
Well, it's ruminants in particular, so cows and sheep, and it has to do with their stomachs and how they work. They have multiple stomachs, and they belch out. Most of that methane is coming out of their belches. But they can also produce methane through their manure, depending on how their manure is stored. But in particular in the United States, but also in Denmark, as we're talking about, the cows themselves are a major source of methane.
And what do you see as the goal behind this tax that Denmark is putting in place? Is it to get farmers to reduce their herds? How does this tax lead to reduced methane emissions?
Yeah, well, they have multiple parts of this policy. So the tax is only one part of it. But yes, the biggest part of their agriculture sector is dairy and hog production. And so they are trying to address that head on, but they also have components of that policy that help farmers transition towards reforestation on their land, to help install wetlands, what they call peatlands in Europe, which are also major sources of greenhouse gas emissions when you drain those wetlands. And reforestation, of course, can help pull carbon dioxide out of the air. It's both helping farmers transition out of so much animal production. They're still going to produce a lot of animals and still produce meat and dairy, but maybe not as much, and maybe scale back and then have some of their land transition towards more climate beneficial land practices.
Ben Lilliston with the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And finally, this week was can't-miss viewing for sports fans as the Olympics got underway in Paris. But amid all the competition, concerns grew over bacteria levels in the Seine River and a heat wave that blanketed much of France and forced some changes to the events. It shows that even the Olympic Games themselves are not immune to the impacts of climate change. PBS News arts and culture correspondent Jeffrey Brown explores how the changing climate is changing the world of sport.
The crack of the bat, a throw from the outfield. On hallowed ground in American sports, Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, New York, it's time for that great baseball tradition, the pregame warm-up. But these days, here as everywhere, warm-up means something much more.
Every professional sports community in the United States is being affected by climate change.
Alan Hershkowitz is the Environmental Science and Sustainability Advisor for the New York Yankees, the first environmental scientist hired by a pro team across all sports. At his urging, the Yankees became the first North American pro team to sign a United Nations pledge to bring down greenhouse gas emissions, because, he says, the stakes are too high.
So there is an urgency because guess what? Children are not going to be able to play baseball outside. People are not going to be able to play tennis outside. Something's got to give.
The last 10 years have been the warmest ever recorded. It's pushed the globe into new and uncharted territory, and it's pushing sports to its limits.
The big issue with climate change, the one that's at the top of every sports scientist's mind right now, is heat.
Madeline Orr is a sports ecologist and author of a new book, Warming Up: How Climate Change is Changing Sport. She used baseball to highlight how rising temperatures have fueled the weather disasters that affect sports' bottom line. The powerful thunderstorms that cause rain delays. The churning hurricanes that have completely swamped ballparks. The massive wildfires that bring dystopian scenes and sometimes game postponements.
You'd be hard-pressed to find a facility manager who's not worried about storms and wildfire and heat and all these things. They know about it. For a very long time, though, the assumption has been, oh, it's a one-off. And that's really a dangerous assumption because you'll clean up that mess and not necessarily put in place the adaptations that are going to help reduce the risks next time.
One player going to die and they're going to see.
Indeed, sports are trying to adapt, from implementing rest periods at the U.S. Open to help players cope with extreme heat, to holding the 2019 World Championship Marathon in Qatar at midnight to avoid unsafe temperatures. For baseball, one adaptation, roofs, taking fans not out to the ball game, but in. But experts, including Madeline Orr, note that adaptations only go so far.
On the winter side, it's essentially, are we going to have a season at all? That's the question. And it's because we're not getting as much snow, and where we are getting snow, it's just melting too fast. So the solution for 50 years has been, we will make snow artificially and blow it out of these guns, but you can make snow all you want. And if it's not cold enough outside for the snow to stick on the ground, it's going to melt.
On the trails of Mount Bachelor in Bend, Oregon, Olympian cross-country skier Gus Schumacher is living that reality. He's not able to rely on snow that's been there in the past.
We've shifted our camp a little bit earlier just so we make sure we get on good snow.
We reach Schumacher as he trained for the Alpine Skiing World Cup and the next Winter Olympics. Conditions on this day, not bad. But that wasn't the case back in February, when he raced in the American Birkebeiner in northern Wisconsin.
This year was my first year, and there was not a drop of snow on the entire length of trail from Cable to Hayward. Like, the actual trail was totally dry.
The warmest winter in 130 years reduced the 50-kilometer race to a man-made loop of entirely artificial snow.
Climate change has dramatically altered the conditions for winter sports, including Nordic skiing.
Schumacher has grown so concerned that earlier this year he traded his ski gear for a suit and appeared on Capitol Hill with the advocacy group Protect Our Winters to share his experience.
Rising temperatures have led to shorter and more erratic winter seasons, with snow cover becoming increasingly unreliable.
We took the opportunity to say, these are the things that we can do to try to stay ahead of reducing our carbon footprint. So, big or small, we're turning over every stone.
Back at the ballpark, we met Doug Behar, Yankees Senior Vice President of Stadium Operations.
Natural cooling, you could feel the breeze come through.
He showed us some of the ways the Yankees are trying to mitigate climate change, not just adapt to it. Starting at the cavernous Great Hall, where fans enter the stadium. Constructed in an eco-friendly manner, it doesn't require air conditioning. Where cooling is required,
So a little bit like being in the bottom of a ship or something. Yes.
a new water-based cooling system is much more energy efficient. recycling and compost bins in every concourse, packaged food given away to shelters after every game. All of it leads to less electricity use and less food waste, which means fewer greenhouse gases that warm the planet.
90% of our environmental work the fans don't see because they relate to our equipment. They don't know that we're using LED lights that reduced our lighting emission by 60%. You know, a lot of it is invisible.
What's much more visible, Alan Hershkowitz says, is the influence sports and athletes have on millions.
Guess what? They learn from their sports organization. Sports loyalty is handed down generation to generation. Less than 20% of Americans regularly follow science. Over 80% regularly follow sports. The most influential role models are athletes. If athletes are selling cars, if they're endorsing banks, if they're selling pizza, why can't they sell environmental literacy?
The Yankees haven't won a championship since 2009, but they're off to a great start this year. Doug Behar sees plenty more to do on and off the field.
The Yankees are doing our best to try to stay ahead of the curve, lead where we can, and certainly do all the things that are necessary to be productive and responsible.
While winning championships.
Absolutely.
For PBS News Weekend, I'm Jeffrey Brown at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx.
And that's it for this week's episode of PBS News Weekly. For all of us, thank you so much for watching.